And it does. So we'll press tweet. The official Live Now tweet has gone out. Thanks for joining us once again. I'm Sammy K. Powers, and this is the PHP Roundtable. This is a live podcast of developers discussing topics that PHP nerds care about. And the ultimate goal of this podcast is to learn a little something from each other. If you're listening live and you want to be a part of this little shindig, I've got my notifications pulled open for the PHP Roundtable Twitter handle. So if you just use the PHP Roundtable on Twitter, I'll see that notification, and we'll try to get your witty, snarky comment or actual question addressed live if we can. Adding tests to PHP source is a great way to get involved with PHP internals. And if you don't know how to get started, you're in luck, because PHP TestFest 2017 is going on right now. Well, actually not right now, but it's going to be happening from September to December of this year. And user groups and individuals around the world are going to organize to learn how to add tests to PHP source and become official internals contributors. Today we chat about what we can expect from TestFest 2017, and we'll also be looking a little bit at the history of TestFest, going down memory lane and talking about TestFest history. So now that we know what we're talking about, and in no particular order, let's meet our panelists. And I always say in no particular order, but it actually is a particular order. In the CMS that I have set up, my custom CMS for PHP Roundtable, it's the order in which I added them. So I always say in no particular order, but it's technically not in no particular order, but it is in no particular order. We're going to start off with the guy who said, I'm never good at BIOS. Oh, wait, that's not part of his bio. Software developer and Shootproof and founder of the Atlanta PHP user group and co-organizer of the Nashville PHP user group. Or is it just Nashville PHP?
That's correct. Nashville PHP user group is fine.
Yes, that's Ben Ramsey. Welcome, Ben.
Hi.
We also have Rafael Dohms. He's the troublemaker and community organizer and one of the organizers for Amsterdam PHP. Welcome, Rafael.
Hey, Sammy. Good to be here.
We also have Zoë Slattery, and she's a contractor for IBM and was involved with PHP development from 2006 to 2009. Welcome, Zoe.
Hi.
And finally, we have Mr. Kyle Evans. He's in charge of training and certification for RogueWave and nerd herder to the worldwide herd. I don't think I've ever said that like without stumbling over one of the words. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we're talking about TestFest, and every single one of you have some sort of involvement with TestFest. And I could start with pretty much any of you, but I'm going to start with Ben, because you're the one who's kind of been pushing for TestFest 2017. So what is TestFest, and why TestFest 2017, Ben?
Well, TestFest is an initiative to help improve the code coverage of the PHP core. It has a long history. I think we'll get into that in a little bit. But I was at PHP Tech in May in Atlanta, and I was having a conversation with, I think, Michelangelo Van Dam. And just the topic of TestFest came up. I think it may have been after your talk on writing PHP tests. And we were kind of reminiscing a little bit. And I said, let's bring that back. So kind of went from there, and as is usually the case with things I do, I tend to just kind of forget about them and never follow through. And this time I said, I need to follow through with this. So I went ahead and announced it on the user group admin's mailing list, and I started kind of working on a website for it. Things were kind of quiet and slow moving for a little bit. No one really said much else about it other than that they were interested. And I kind of felt like, well, once I get this website up, it'll generate some excitement, and it has your cute little Wooble character on it. So I thought, that's going to get some people talking. Some of them are going to be kind of like, what is this? But I kind of felt like, any kind of conversation around it would be good for spreading the word. And it just kind of has gone from there.
That's awesome. That Wooble character was a piece of artwork that I had commissioned for a game that I was going to work on for like my own stuff, and I never did the game. So I was like, you know what? I've used this for my talk for writing tests for PHP source, and I just messaged Ben. I was like, I know you're pushing for TestFest 2017. Could you use Wooble? And he's like, sure. And I'm so glad to see the artwork not go to waste. So how does this thing work? Like, how does TestFest, like, how do you like get involved? Like, where's the starting point?
Well, right now, it's we want to do it from September through December. And I kind of felt like initially I said just 1 month, and then I was looking back through the history of things, and I think the first year it may have been 4 months, and there were maybe other years where it lasted for 3 months. I felt like giving it a broad enough range would help give any group that wants to participate a chance to do so without having to be constrained. So we're going to do September through December. The way to get involved right now, and we're still working out a lot of details, or I'm still working out a lot of the details, but I'm hoping that others will jump in and kind of help with those as we go along. But by August, I want to be able to have all of the stuff in place for groups to know what it is they need to do. But in a nutshell, to get involved right now, we have a Google group. I would encourage everyone who wants to participate to get involved, to just sign up for the Google group. Start asking questions, because as people ask questions, I'm hoping that other people will jump in, and then other people, some people will start taking some leadership roles and facilitating some of those other areas that we have needs for. But we want to have a way for people to basically to track these contributions. But for a group that wants to participate, I guess ideally when you're during the time of the TestFest, September through December, a group would have one or more events where they introduced what TestFest is, and then have a short session on how to create PHP tests. I think that what you've already contributed will go a long way to helping groups with that. And then a mini hackathon where people just kind of write tests, or maybe write one test and help each other write those tests. And that's really kind of what one of those events would look like. I don't think they have to be extremely kind of in-depth. They don't have to be, there doesn't have to be a lot of time sink into it for a group organizer. And then the next step is figuring out how to get those tests contributed into the core. And we want to have prizes for different levels of contributors, and those kinds of things. So those are kind of the nebulous ideas that haven't yet been solidified yet.
Gotcha. So a user group could potentially kind of make that like a several meetups, like over the course of maybe 2 or 3 different meetups, right? Or
Exactly.
Just do one meetup with all of them, all the stuff, all the things.
Right.
That's cool. Well, Kyle, you sent out a message not too long ago. I can't remember if it was like the user group admins email list or what, but you were kind of asking the question. So what are the goals for TestFest 2017? Like, where can we just make a progress meter that we can just put a number on to measure arbitrary data points or something? So what was the consensus on that?
Well, the main thing that kind of came out of that was Anthony Farrar corrected me and let me know that these are integration tests, not unit tests, which is, I'm not picking on Anthony. That's actually an important point, and it was a misconception on my part. Beyond that, there's a thread on the Google group. I just tweeted out a link to the Google group. If you're watching this, you can find it on my Twitter account. Go join that. Get involved in this, but I don't think there has been a consensus. I mean, to me, the obvious one is just raw number of tests that are being tested. But Liz Smith doesn't seem to think that that's accurate, because some of I was under the impression that each PPT file was a test, and it's not. There's multiple ones in there, or some of them apparently aren't tests. There's weirdness going on. So at the moment, I don't have any good consensus. I'll be honest with you. My motive for asking was wholly selfish, because Nomad PHP is kicking in a voucher for a video for every test that is completed. But I got to be able to measure the tests that are completed. So if you write 10 tests, you're going to get 10 videos. I think Rafael, at one of them, didn't you commit a couple hundred tests one year, Rafael?
Yeah, the entire user group back in 2009, we kicked in 144.
Wow.
Yeah, so I had like 51. Blanco had like 30 something. So it's like we kicked in a lot of stuff.
Well, Nomad is a sponsor. We're kicking in videos for each coupons for each one committed, and the person that commits the most will get a year subscription. And Rogue Wave is kicking in elephants for the top 10 committers. And we've got a brand new class on architect level design in PHP. And we're donating a seat in that class to the one who commits the most. So, but all of that is dependent on being able to figure out how to count these things. And so that was, my motive, like I said, was purely selfish. I got to figure out how to count these things.
And I think that we
do it.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, couldn't you look at the line coverage of what you're testing and do it on number of lines of PHP code that you've covered in that an individual has written tests for?
That's an interesting metric, Zoe. Thanks. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I hadn't either. That's a good way to do it, I think. Yeah, because you could have one test that actually ends up covering 10 lines of uncovered code, whereas you have another one that only covers like 1 or 2 lines. Yeah, that's a great metric, I think.
It's kind of what we had back in 2009 as well, because we were, we were taking whatever the functions were that didn't have tests, and we just went covering everything. The big focus back then was the image functions. They had very little coverage. So I'm like, looking it up, I had apparently 8 tests just for image char. Right, so each one covering a different scenario, and then you have like the error tests, the tests for variation. So there's like a lot you can take of a single test case that ends up being 4 or 5 files, just to cover everything that method does.
And you were able to find the test coverage how? Like how did you know what wasn't covered?
So back then they had, and I'm not sure if it's still up, but they had an LCOV subdomain on php.net that actually had code coverage being run for all of the builds.
It was gcov.php.net, and I don't know if it's still there.
It is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then we basically went through that. I think it was me and Guilherme, the two who knew something of C, not really C, but something. We could at least understand what was going on. So we would just point people, look here, you need to test like this, this, and this. And then, people would start reading through that and trying to understand, okay, what are the scenarios where we can get into this? And how can we write a test that covers it, right?
So you're saying you don't know necessarily C, but you were still able to contribute tests to PHP source.
Well, definitely. I mean, the entire day was, we had very little knowledge of C. We just had... But if you read through it, it's like it's easy enough to understand what is an error situation because there's a big if and like, hey, I remember ifs, I know how to do this. Right? So you check like, oh, this means PHP is throwing an error, right? So it was just a few little things that we picked up on, which are easy enough to read, even though if you don't know C. And with that, we were able to start like defining a pattern and then just attacking every function with that same pattern, looking for that same repetition, to then test, the error cases, the validation cases, and things like that.
And the actual tests aren't in C, though, right?
No, the tests are actually in PHP. Actually, it's a mix, right? The PHP file, it actually is more of a text file with subdivisions where each block does a thing, right? So a block tells you how the code that you run, a block that checks, the expected output of that. And then each of these blocks does one thing, and there's good documentation on this on the PHP website. And then essentially the block that says what the test is, it's PHP code that you just run and it will output something to the command line or whatever. And then you check what that output is.
That's one of the best things I like about being able to contribute to PHP internals without actually knowing C. Since PHP is written in C, you can still contribute to internals and be an internals contributor by just doing PHP. And like you said, just kind of roughly looking at C and being like, okay, I can see these lines that aren't covered by tests using the gcov website. Yeah, that's I love how it's more easy to get involved that way. But you had mentioned a couple different times 2009, and so Zoe, I'm really excited that you were able to come and join us because I've seen your name all over the TestFest like documentation from many years ago, and I'm just really curious how you got involved in the project from like really long time ago.
Okay, so ages ago. In about, I think, 2007, I worked for IBM and we worked on a project that was kind of related to PHP. And at that stage, IBM, we noticed that the PHP engine didn't have enough tests. The line coverage was about 50%. And so from IBM's point of view, then, they had me writing tests for PHP and 1 or 2 people in India, and we were contributing them. And I just got more and more involved with the PHP community, and I got involved with my local user group. And I think it was Lucas, I can't pronounce his second name, Lucas Kawe Smith or something. I think he ran the 2008 PHP TestFest, and I helped him a lot in that. And we certainly had the PHP London group contributed to that. And then I can't remember how I got to take over the 2009 one. And I think it certainly wasn't only me on my own. It was me and a lot of help from Scott McVicker and loads of other people. So I think mainly my role in the 2009 one was chasing people up and trying to just enable things rather than maybe doing very much.
Well, did you write some documentation as well?
Yeah, I think I probably did. I think I wrote stuff on how to run tests. I think I wrote a thing that would generate the blank sections of the test, because I got a bit bored. As Rafael said, those tests are several different sections and quite a lot of them are quite repetitive, and I got a bit bored sitting typing that in all the time, so I wrote something to generate that.
It's still in the code base today, by the way. I saw that, and your documentation is still there too, because that's helped me to get involved with this project too. So the stuff that you did many years ago is still making an impact, which is really cool.
That's great.
Yeah. Now I also saw that you had gone in there, and there's a repo that exists in the PHP sort of organization, where I think it was you and somebody else was kind of refactoring the tool that actually runs the test suite, run tests. Yeah. I'd love to know a little bit about how you got involved with kind of wanting to tackle that big thing to chew.
Okay, so the thing that runs the tests, called runtests.php, is a horrible script. It really is. I mean, it's been added to over the years. Maybe somebody's rewritten it since then, and it's not horrible anymore.
It's still exactly the same.
Right. Well, it's terrible. So I think myself and Stefan Preach decided that, but it also runs everything in sequence, and you should be able to run things in parallel. Because if you run absolutely all the PHP tests, it can take hours. In fact, it's the gcov machine that runs all the PHP tests and takes hours to produce that output. So we decided we'd try and do something that would run the tests in parallel, but it's very hard because the tests for particular extensions are dependent on each other in some respects. So you have to run the tests for the file extension all sequentially, and you have to run the tests for, I don't know, some other extension sequentially. So the only thing we could do was run like directories of tests in parallel. So that's what we tried to do. We wrote something that did that, and we got it to speed up reasonably. But then I think nobody was interested enough in it, in taking that on and replacing run tests. I mean, Derek said I just ought to replace run tests with it, and I thought, no, there'll be an outcry if I do that. So I never got around to doing it, and it's still sitting in that repo. And I think it probably still works. It was essentially complete, but I never did anything with it. So.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't even know that existed, and there has been some conversation of refactoring run tests, and I mean, pretty much ever since probably when you were doing it too, like that conversation's kind of come in and out. But I saw the repo and started looking through the code, and I was like, wow, there's so much of that you did so many years ago that I don't know, maybe it was ahead of its time, because like I look at that code and I was like, that's not how I remember PHP back then. Like it's like the way that you organize and structured the code is like, that's maybe modern PHP developers would do it that way. But I was like, how did you know this stuff? It's awesome.
Oh, I was trying to learn the object-oriented stuff at the same time. And Stefan Preach is amazing at that kind of stuff. He really kept picking holes in my code, and I have to keep rewriting it. So, he was pretty good.
Nice. Well, Rafael, you were involved back then too, right? In 2009 area, like around that time. What was your involvement like?
So I think I kind of parachuted into it. I mean, I saw the initiative come by, and I don't remember how. I remember talking a lot to Zoe back then. And back then I was still back in Brazil, in São Paulo, running the user group over there. And so the excitement on PHP TestFest was nice, and we had a nice group of people who wanted to get more active. So I decided, hey, you know what? Let's try and do something with the user group, right? So we got the user group together. We had like, I don't know, 9, 10 people. I remember, I think it was a couple of days after Michelangelo had his own event in Belgium, back when PHP Benelux was still just PHP B, right? So it's like, you know, let's get around this. So I remember starting the event, doing that. We literally got there with Sebastian Bergman's presentation on how to write PHP, right? That was the entirety of the resources we had, and a little bit of knowledge about where GCOV was and that kind of stuff. We got in there, so myself and Blanco started just trying to figure out how to write tests, while the rest of the team, the rest of the people who were there, started like setting up their environments, because back then me and Blanco already had the source checked out and all of that, back in the CVS SVN days. And then we just started trying, and when we managed to finally, replicate and find the pattern, we started replicating that to everyone else. And I remember by the end of the event, I think we had like 70-something tests. And then we just kept going, right? So after that happened, I kept on helping people get their tests merged, which ended up causing me to get karma in the source, because I just kept asking people, hey, look, it's ready. Come on, here's 5 more and 5 more. I just remember a point where I think it was Scott. He was like, okay, look, I'm just going to give you karma to this because I'm done, merging all these things for you. And then we just kept going, right? So that user group ended up committing 144 tests, which from the records we got was the user group that most contributed in that year of 2009. And then we kept going after that, right? So after that, I wanted to get more involved, and I had a bunch of chats with Zoe as well, with Ben. We tried to keep it going, and I remember 2010 was like, okay, we're going to make this happen. But I think back then we realized that the trivial parts of PHP, and this is PHP 5.3, right? This was just before the release, just at the release, right? The trivial parts were all tested, so people were like, I don't know what to test anymore, right? And since then, I've always wanted to see that come back again, because it was, for me as someone who started contributing to the core and the people who were there, it was this simple thing. I mean, writing tests is not that hard. We were not used to testing back then. This is, before testing became the thing in PHP, right? And it gave me such pleasure to be able to be doing something, even though it was simple, and seeing the results. And we just kept going with that afterwards. But I miss this, right? I've always missed going back to saying, okay, people, here's a chunk of tests, here a chunk of code. We need tests, and just point people at it, right? I think back then we even discussed having like a doc fest, because it was the 2 things we needed, right? More documentation and more testing. So none of those actually came out of the paper after that, though.
Well, it's interesting how things have changed since then. There's 15,000 tests. I think at the time there was, if I remember seeing a statistic that was like maybe around 9,000 at the time or something. So it's got a lot more tests in there now, which makes it even harder to run them all in serial, which I think that eventually the pain point of running everything in serial will eventually get to a breaking point to where like, okay, let's just stop everything and just rewrite this thing. But the documentation, PHP7, or wait, no, php-internalsbook.org, I think. Hold on, let me double check that. I should have double checked that. php-internalsbook.com. That's the official, well, it's not the official documentation, but it is some documentation that Julian, we mentioned this in the last episode, but Julian Pauly's been throwing a ton of time into adding documentation there for PHP and 7, because for PHP 7 and internal stuff, because internal stuff hasn't been documented, especially past 7. So, and it also has some testing documentation up there, but not a whole lot. So you can always add more as you learn. Maybe this will be a part of TestFest too, right? Like adding more documentation, right? For just like in the past, maybe we can keep that spirit going for 2017.
Yeah, I think
awesome.
The main thing when we started trying to figure out what to test, I mean, you would look at GCOV, and that's a little bit hard. But once you figure out what the function was, and you look at the code, we would go straight back to the manual to look at what the documentation said and figure out, oh, that's what it's doing here, right? According to the parameters and whatever it is. So as you're trying to test a function, you end up realizing holes in the documentation. So they go hand in hand when you start fixing things up.
That's awesome. Now, unfortunately, contributing to the official PHP documentation is less than trivial. I mean, there is an easy way to do it through a GUI interface, but if you want to like actually have push access, you have to check out like 16 different SVN repos and then build it locally and build the entire PHP.NET website locally and do all this stuff. So it's a bit more of an investment of time, but something you could also do part of the TestFest, right? All right. So user group admins, and I think this. I want to kick this to Cal because you seem to be kind of the shepherder of user group admins across the world.
But I prefer the term barker, but yeah, okay.
The barker, nerd herder. So if I'm a user group admin, how should I take next steps to kind of get involved with TestFest, PHP TestFest?
Well, I can tell you what we're doing because I actually started working or running a user group because after telling everybody for years and years, go run one, I actually did it. And boy, I'm sorry to everybody. I apologize. I had no idea it was this much work. But we're going to be doing we're dedicating a meeting to it. We're going to talk about what tests are. We're going to talk about how to contribute them. I'm going to package up all the videos you've been doing so that my people have something that they can watch, and then we're going to try. I got to get with Adam on this, but we have 3 user groups that are part of the SoFlow PHP, and what I'm going to try to do is organize something where we all three groups come together one Saturday, and we're going to just do it. And we'll probably, since one group's in Miami and I'm up in Palm Beach and Adam's kind of in the middle, we'll probably hit Fort Lauderdale and we'll all come together. And our buddies over at Ranger Technical, I mean, they'll supply pizza and all kind of fun stuff. So we got food taken care of. But we'll get together for 4 to 6 hours and just write tests and get everybody used to it. And my goal is not to get or write all the tests right then. My goal is for everybody to get there. We set up everybody's gear. We make sure the repo's set up correctly. We show them how to do it. Everybody walks through doing a couple, and then everybody can go back home and continue to write tests through December. It's not just a one and you're done type thing. If you're going to invest the time to get it set up, you might as well keep writing. So that's how we're going to do it in Palm Beach or in West Palm. So if that works for your group, hey, wonderful. I'd love to hear how other groups are planning on participating because maybe I've missed something.
For sure. Yeah. Well, and
curious as well.
Yeah, because go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Because you're a user group admin as well, right, Rafael? Yeah.
So I mean, as soon as I saw this, I'm like, oh, I gotta get on this, right? And then I was hanging out in the PHP Netherlands chat. And I was just planning, get everyone together on a Saturday and we kick it off and have all that and then get pizza. Now, Michelangelo got involved and it has turned into a festival now. So Michelangelo wants to go all out and organize this insane thing, which I'm totally in favor of. I'm like, well, just tell me what I can do then and we'll do it. But it looks like we're going to try and organize like an entire Netherlands thing. Probably in Utrecht, which is kind of like the center of the Netherlands in general. So we get everyone there. We have one big event there and essentially follow the same idea that Cal mentions, right? Have one day of fun, like get everyone to understand how to do it, get them set up, and then just keep writing tests as you go because it's kind of like a bug, right? It bites you the first time and you just carry on with it because it's a lot of fun as well and a quick way to contribute.
Absolutely. It's super rewarding to get involved like that. You said Michelangelo Van Damme, right?
Yeah, the man.
I can be on Twitter. So he's one of the godfathers. So it's between Cal and Michelangelo. It's different godfathers though. What's the distinction? It's one's godfather of PHP and one's godfather of PHP something.
I do not claim any of that. Okay, that's a cruel joke that people play. I always call Michelangelo the Don of PHP because, especially over in Europe, if it's PHP, he's involved in it, and I've seen him just do so much over there. I'm just what I call a damn lucky programmer. Okay, I just kind of fell into this, and the fact that people call me that makes me giggle. But you'll never hear me call myself that.
We just follow the teachings of Master Splinter.
Very nice. Hey, Ben, I noticed there was somebody who had contributed something on the PHP TestFest.org website. It is .org, right?
Yes.
It's open source, so people are making contributions to it. And somebody had contributed something that linked to a Docker container.
Right. There's a group of some folks out of Brazil who have written a Docker container called Docker PHP QA, and it's just a set of tools that allows you to write a test, and your PHP does not have to be inside PHP source anywhere, but you can write a PHP and then you can use the Docker container. They've provided some kind of syntactic sugar on top of it, so it's just like a command line tool that spins up the container for you and then runs the version of PHP you want against that test file. So all you do is, I think you're typing something like PHP QA, the path to the PHP test, and then a number like 5.6 or 7.1 that tells what version of PHP to run. And then it runs that test against that version inside the Docker container. So you don't have to worry about having to compile PHP on your own. This helps you get up and running to test things right away. I think the next step beyond it, though, is to learn how to compile PHP, because there are certain things you want to turn on or disable while you're testing things, and you can only really get to that level when you go kind of the hard route. But this is a great tool to get up and running quickly, writing PHP tests, and then running the tests without having to kind of go through the run test setup.
That's awesome. I saw that you had also contributed as of a few minutes ago, you added the screencast that I made for writing tests for PHP source to the website.
Yes. So yeah, the website is available, as you said, php-testfest.org. It is, there's a link to GitHub at the top right. It'll take you off to the repo. That repo, within the docs folder, is the site that's being served here. It's all written in Markdown. There is a Docker container for it as well, so you can run it locally, and to view your changes, or to preview your changes. But I welcome anyone who wants to write a tutorial for it, to add content to this. This is to help other people have successful TestFest. So, Cal, if you want to, write up a few paragraphs on what you're doing in West Palm Beach with your group, that could give other people good ideas for what to do with their group, and so forth. So the idea here is, as a community, help support each other with ideas for things to do for the events, with tools to use to make it easier to contribute and write tests, and then just the information. So I'll be updating it with more information about prizes and sponsorships and how to make sure that, I'll be updating it with all the information about how we're going to track, the contributions so that we can, give out the prizes appropriately and, report that back to Nomad PHP and everyone else who's giving out prizes too.
Excellent idea.
Well, I'd like to reiterate the importance of contributing back to adding documentation and things, because we have Zoe here who had added stuff years ago, and her contributions are still making an impact. And I think that really goes to show how, when you do contribute back and add documentation, that it's going to make ripple effects throughout the years, through decades and decades of PHP. So I think just looking at that is kind of inspiring to me to want to contribute and add documentation. It's like, man, I can make an impact even 10 years down the road. So thank you, Zoe, for all, by the way, for everything that you've contributed way back in the day.
I put a link to Zoe's slides, Test or Die, from PHP London 2008.
Oh my God.
in the resources. I had to go to archive.org to download the slides.
Yeah. Oh dear.
So if I'm not a user group admin and I don't have a user group that's in the area, is there still a way to get involved with TestFest?
No.
Start a user group.
User group.
I have been specifically saying group instead of user group on this website because the goal is to work with others, to learn with others about writing tests. I think that's been the goal of TestFest since the beginning. It's kind of a networking opportunity to kind of get to know other developers who are like-minded, learn from each other and writing tests, and then learn how to contribute back. So I think the community aspect is very important. I don't think you can do this on your own. You can't be an individual and really participate. However, if you don't have a local group in your area, as Cal is often saying, you're the leader of that group now, but you can work with. I'm open to you creating your own group for TestFest to work with coworkers or friends. You could do this online in a virtual kind of remote setting, but the goal is to put together a group, preferably a user group. But if you can't find a user group, find a group online that you can meet with virtually or work with your coworkers or friends to do so.
So just an idea, but the Java user groups have a thing called the VJUG. So it's a virtual Java user group. And that covers all of the people that can't get to user groups. So, but it does, like any other user group, I think they meet regularly and have events, but they meet online. So it's maybe somebody might like to think about starting something like that.
I think Cal Evans would be perfect for that. Cal, you want to start that?
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Zoe, I actually run a virtual user group called Nomad PHP. We meet twice a month now. We have the European and the US meeting. And I had not thought of doing anything with Nomad, but Sammy, Ben, I might ping y'all and let's see if we can't get a lightning talk or two to encourage not only Nomaders, but we can throw it up on the YouTube channel and get a little more publicity out of this.
Sounds great.
Let's do it.
I'll ping y'all tomorrow.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, this is happening live, by the way, everybody. We're this thing is still progressing, and you just get some nerds in a hangout, and we just come up with some ideas, and we're like, let's just do that. Rob Allen is joining us too, by the way, on Twitter. He was saying blast from the past, listening to Zoë Slattery on PHP Roundtable talk about managing PHP TestFest 2009 with Scott Mac Vicar.
Vicar.
Yeah.
Mac Vicar. Yeah.
Scott Mac the Vicar.
Yeah, for sure.
Not a vicar. No way.
Not even close.
So this has been a great conversation. I'm really excited about TestFest 2017 and see how many new people we get involved with PHP internals and become official internals contributors. I do want to start wrapping it up with the developer shout out, which is a segment that recognizes a developer for being awesome in the community. And the developer shout out, we give a $50 Amazon gift card, and the $50 Amazon gift card is sponsored by ZenCon 2017. Great conference. I'm excited to go again this year. But ZenCon 2017, join the best and the brightest in PHP in Las Vegas this October. And go to zencon.com for more. So thank you, ZenCon, for sponsoring the developer shout out. And our developer that we officially chose was 7PHP on Twitter, and it's Karate Wasim. Is that right, Cal? Yes, awesome. So
you're asking Cal how to pronounce a name.
What have we come to? Oh my god!
So Cal, why did we nominate Karate for this?
Karate pinged me, I want to say back in 2008, and just innocuous. Hey, would you be open for an interview? I'm like, well, sure, I'll do anything. So then he sends me a 36-page proctology exam. This is not an interview. It took me 4 hours to complete this thing, but it was one of the most complete interviews that I've ever seen. And he's since gone on to actually interview people of interest. I mean, he started with me. I have no idea why, guy, but he's interviewed a lot of people, including DHH of Rails. Rails familiarity, or he built Rails. David, I don't know his other names, but he does an awful lot of interviewing. Karate lives on an island off the coast of an island off the coast of Africa. Okay, on a windy day, you can't land a hot air balloon on this island, but he participates actively in the PHP community. Every time I turn around, I'm seeing him do something. So when you ask who to nominate, it was obvious to me. We need to give a shout out to this guy for doing all he can to help build the community.
That's great. Thank you so much, Karate, for your involvement, despite being in the remote areas. And I think that's an inspiration for a lot of people to look at and be like, well, I live in the middle of nowhere. It's like, well, look at 7PHP on Twitter and tell me the same thing. So we're going to be sending you a $50 Amazon gift card, again, sponsored by ZenCon. So thanks again, ZenCon, for sponsoring. And I do want to give a shout out to Chris Shaw, who has contributed show notes once again. He's been contributing lots of show notes, which are open source on github.com/PHP Roundtable. And there's a repo there called show-notes. You just write the notes and mark down, and he's been writing so many of them, but he contributed episode 64, which was PHP 7 source code, a deep dive, where me and Sarah MG from many freaking genius internals contributor, we just sat down and started talking about some PHP internal stuff. And another brand new show notes contributor, Christopher Thomas, another Chris, contributed episode 30, which was SOA and microservices. That was a long time ago. That was an old episode. I'm really glad we finally got show notes for that. There's lots of episodes that I don't have show notes from like a long time ago before we open sourced the show notes. So thank you, Christopher Thomas, for your contribution. And of course, Chris Shaw. The Chris is for the contributions. And I want to kind of officially wrap up with some shameless plugs. And I do want to also announce some upcoming fun events. By the way, are any events like officially taking part in TestFest, or has that even been discussed yet?
So I know that Madison PHP mentioned possibly doing something during their conference, because their conference, I think, is in late September. So you'll have to talk to Beth about that. But I know that she mentioned that on the UG admin's mailing list.
Beautiful. There may or may not be an event at a upcoming conference in Vegas. I'm not naming any names here, but there's a conference coming up in Vegas, and there may or may not be a TestFest event.
I know that the PHP Vegas user group has been talking about it. So maybe they'll do something together with some conference in that area.
And I might be giving a talk on writing tests for PHP internals in an event in Las Vegas as well. The one that I'm giving it at is at ZenCon, which is October 23rd through the 26th. So definitely come and listen to that talk. But I'm also giving it at Northeast PHP in August. And that's August 9th through the 11th on Prince Edward Island. It's coming up really soon. It's in Canada. And then Pacific Northwest PHP. I've got 2 talks that I'm going to be giving there, and that's September 7th through the 9th. I said the wrong dates in the last podcast, so I double-checked the dates this time. But Pacific Northwest PHP, lovely conference in Seattle, Washington, September 7th through the 9th. Lovely, lovely conference. Really excited about it. And we kind of mentioned it, but I finally did, after many episodes of talking about, I want to do this screencast thing. I've never done a screencast. How do you do it? I just want to, and then I think it was James McCreary, was just like, just do it. And I was like, okay, so I did it. And so that's what we've been talking about. I finally recorded my first screencast for writing tests for PHP, test for PHP source. And I tried to fit it into 5 episodes. On that last one, it was like a really, really long episode. So I broke it up into 2. So it's 6 episodes long for everything from compiling PHP to source to actually submitting the PR to PHP source repo. So definitely check that out. Sorry, I got a lot of shameless promos for myself this episode. I really apologize. So enough about me. I want to start with you, Ben. Do you have anything that you want to shamelessly promote?
Well, if the episode had not been about PHP TestFest, I would have shamelessly promoted PHP TestFest. Okay. I will promote. I'll actually give a shout out to a guy who recently contributed to the news.php.net website. I had been on my list for a long time was to get that up to date to look like the rest of php.net, the new designs. And so just kind of over the weekend or sometime last week, he made a commit, and I said, hey, let's just go all the way with it and make it look like the rest of PHP.NET. So over the weekend, he put all that together. We've gone ahead and pushed it up. So news.php.net now has a brand new design thanks to this gentleman. I'm trying to find his name. That's what I'm looking at right now.
I saw that on Twitter the other day, and I was like, oh, it looks so much prettier.
His name is, let's see, come on. Here we go. I'm not going to pronounce this very well, so maybe Cal should tell me how to pronounce it. Sorry if I butcher your name. Arnaud Lemessier. And he's from France, so I don't speak French very well, so that's probably why it's going to come out wrong. But thank you very much, Arnaud, for contributing.
Excellent. What about you, Cal? You have anything you want to promote?
Yes, I do. Hang on just one second. We talked a little bit about Nomad PHP. I've got a meeting coming up in October that I am just very excited about. We've got a speaker, Keisha Williams, talking about machine learning. And that's not the exciting part, okay? I mean, that's going to be brilliant, but Keisha works for Chick-fil-A. I finally got an in with Chick-fil-A. But no, that's going to be a wonderful talk. I've only heard her speak online. I've seen some of her presentations, and every time I just keep I walk away going, there's no way I'm in the same species as this woman. I feel dumber every time I watch stuff from her. Not because what she's teaching me is dumb. It's just that she's so far beyond me. So I'm very excited about that. You can find more information about that at nomadphp.com. Click on the upcoming meetings. You'll see it.
Excellent. What about you, Rafael? Do you have anything you want to promote?
No, I haven't done anything interesting. No, I mean, everyone's always welcome in Amsterdam if you're around. Great user group. Actually, I think I'll use my 5 minutes of fame here to actually call out the user group in São Paulo, PHP São Paulo, who has, I mean, historically we're the holding the reigning champions. So, and I see they're doing great work. So the people Ben mentioned with the Q8 Docker stuff, that's our people from back there.
Nice.
So I think game is on. We're gonna see who's gonna contribute more this year. So I got a big shout out.
That's awesome. Great. What about you, Zoe? You have anything you want to promote?
No, I'm rubbish at promotion. I guess I'd just like to say I'm so pleased to see this all coming back, and I'm looking forward to somebody giving São Paulo some healthy competition this year, maybe.
Absolutely. That's great. So Sarah Goldman has been blowing up my Twitter for some reason in the past couple of seconds, and I'm kind of scanning it, and she's like, she's correcting things in the screencast that I just posted about testing PHP store stuff. So I'm like, great, I gotta get like screenshots of all of her she's still just notifications going off like crazy. I gotta make a little screenshots of it and like put it like overlays and be like, well, actually, and this will just be like Sarah, well, actually, is over everything in the screencast. So maybe we'll add that later. All right, Ben, Cal, Rafael, and Zoe, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion, and we will be coming back at you with a Docker episode. I finally drank the Docker Kool-Aid, and I've been using it for about 2 months now for client project stuff, and I was wanting to talk about it again. So we're looking forward to that being the next episode. And I am still looking for a sponsor, by the way, for Northeast PHP for transportation, which is it's $900 to get just to cover the cost of airfare since I'm self-employed. It kind of alleviate that hit a little bit, and I will totally give you mad shout outs to your company on Twitter and on PHP Roundtable, and include your whatever you want me to say in 2 talk slides, so you get a big bang for your buck. So I think that's it. I think we're going to wrap this thing up. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you folks in the next episode.